The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. The Radical. This fundamental principles. The Yaron Brook Show.
Hey guys, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday night. Yep. Hope you're having a good start to your weekend. It was a absolutely gorgeous day today in Puerto Rico. Weather outside was sky was blue, the sun was shining. It was 80 degrees outside, and people were at the beach. Yeah, it was gorgeous, just gorgeous. Humidity was about 70%, not too bad. And don't have the same sense of corona and restrictions as much as you do in California. Here, the streets are packed with people. You know, they brought these scooters to Puerto Rico now, so San Juan is full of these kids and adults and all kinds of people riding around scooters up and down the Ashford, the tourist area. So, yeah, I mean, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful summer day. Oh, whoops. No, sorry. Beautiful, 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 beautiful winter day in Puerto Rico. And for all of you who are freezing in some, I don't know, part of the country, I'm sorry. What can I say? I'm sorry. But, it was a gorgeous day. So, yeah, I hope everybody's having a good weekend. We're going to talk today about the Biden stimulus. We're going to talk a little bit about this will be kind of our launch to our Biden derangement syndrome. The idea that that we're going to be very critical of Joe Biden moving into the future. Today will be a mixture because there'll be plenty of opportunity to be critical of Republicans while we're critical of Biden, but that's always going to be the case, right? That's always going to be the case. All right. So today, a lot of politics, economics, stuff like that. We'll see. Of course, Super Chat is open. So any questions you have on any issue, you can. The larger the dollar amount you put to the question, the more likely it is that I answer it. Early, soon, quick, but I will try to answer all the questions. So feel free to use the Super Chat feature. You guys are being pretty good this month about the Super Chat, so don't let today change that. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew asked, would I vote to impeach? Yeah, I definitely would vote to impeach. I mean, Trump's lies about the election. I mean, I would have voted to impeach probably the first time around. Trump's lies about, I mean, his use of the presidency to try to dig up dirt on his opponent, even if the dirt turned out to be true, I would have over the Ukraine thing, I think he should have been impeached. But this one, certainly, I mean, he lied, riled up his supporters. Yeah, legally, technically, you probably couldn't try him for incitement, but as president of the United States, he clearly breached his duty, and I would impeach him. I would convict him. I would ban him for ever being in office. Absolutely. So, to me, Republicans who don't do this are cowards, and they all know they should. They, even McConnell was talking about they probably should. Jim Jordan was talking about censuring. Jim Jordan is very pro-Trump on the House level, wanted to censure the president. Even he realized what Trump did in the weeks leading up to January 6th, and then what he did during January 6th, and then his response to January 6th. All of it, in my view, is irresponsible, anti-American, undermining of our system of government, undermining of the presidency of the United States, and definitely should be impeached. I'm with the Republicans who voted to impeach. There were 10 of them. I'm not with the liberals. I'm not with the left. I'm not with the right. I'm with me. I'm with the individualists. Not many of us, but I'm with the individualists. So, yes. So that was, thank you, Andrew. That was a Super Chat question. Feel free to use the Super Chat questions to ask any questions on Trump, on impeachment, on economics, on art, on movies, on music, on whatever you feel like today. I am open to your suggestions. All right. So Biden has unveiled his stimulus package. The whole idea of a stimulus package, before we get to the details of the Biden stimulus package, the whole idea of a stimulus package, what is the point, right? So the idea is that the economy needs government. It needs the printing press. It needs money in order to produce, in order to create jobs, in order to grow. I mean, that is upside down. The economy needs to produce, to grow, so that there is wealth, so that there is money. If you want to grow the economy long term, the solution is not to take money from some people and give it to others, which every stimulus package by necessity does, because remember, governments do not produce anything. The governments do not create anything. Governments do not create wealth. They do not produce wealth. All governments can do is take your wealth and give it to somebody else, or spend it on whatever they want to spend it on. But they don't have any wealth themselves. So in any context, any government, any money government spends is from you. Now, people today think, oh, well, government can borrow, and the cost of borrowing right now is close to zero, so it doesn't cost anything. Yeah, but the government has to pay that borrowing back at some point, somewhere down the road. It has to take somebody's money and return what it borrowed, which means at some point, somewhere down the road, the government has to take your money, has to take our money, somebody's money, somebody who produces and creates their money has to be taken at some point in order to pay for the government spending. Even if the government prints money, it just prints. It doesn't borrow. It doesn't tax. It just prints the money. Well, that has a negative effect on all the rest of us. It creates malinvestments, it creates bad incentives, and it's called inflation when the government prints money, and it often leads to rising prices and to a lower standard of living. Because not only do prices rise, but there's also malinvestment, so you get bad investments and prices rising, which means you get a lot less economic growth, a lot less prosperity, a lot less advantage. So anything the government does other than protect rights, anything the government does other than protect rights is economically negative, is economically destructive. Whether because it involves taking money from people and making choices for them, or because it involves unhinged investment not hinged to individuals' values, not hinged to individuals' incentives, not hinged to market prices, not hinged to the marketplace. It's investment dependent solely on government bureaucrats, on central planners, on their whims, on the pressure put upon them, on their own desires. So when government spends money on anything other than on the protection of rights, that is a net detriment to the economy. Now, I've heard people say, But look, the government caused the current crisis through its own ineptitude, through the ineptitude of Trump and his minions and the governors and everybody down the pipe, from the CDC to the FDA to Trump to Cuomo to Newsom, to the whole world of politicians and their advisors and government institutions failed in this crisis. So shouldn't the government then help people that were hurt because of the actions of the government? And my answer is no. How can that be right? Yes, it's the government's fault. Most of our economic problems are the government's fault. Most economic issues, when you've got a growing economy and even a semi-free market, the economic issues, the problems, the unemployment, the crashes, the disasters, the crises, are government created. They're not products of the market. So every time the government creates a crisis, it has to step in. No, what's incumbent on the government to do when it creates a crisis is engage in policies that undo the damage that it's done. And what handing people checks does, what so-called, quote, stimulating the economy does, is it doubles up on the problem. But what it does is it might relieve a little bit of the pain today. It might relieve a little bit of the pain today, but it increases the pain later on. It's a trade. Every government stimulus is a trade between a little less pain today for some of you, not all of you, for some of you, for much greater pain in the future for pretty much all of us. That's the trade-off. And of course, we don't vote today. We don't vote today on pain that we'll experience a year from now, 10 years from now, 5 years from now. We vote today for the goodies that politicians promise us today. I mean, one of the reasons that Democrats won in Georgia was because Joe Biden went to Georgia and said, if you vote for Republicans, you're not going to get $2,000 checks. If you vote for the Democrats, you will get $2,000 checks. What do you want? You want $2,000 checks? Vote for us. We'll give it to you. In other words, he bribed them. And it works because, A, people don't have the economic knowledge of the consequences of the stimulus. They don't know the economics, and nobody's telling them that there are going to be consequences. So nobody's telling them the consequences. They don't know the consequences. They don't know economics. Plus, people have a tendency to be less than rational when it comes to weighing, pain today or benefit today versus pain in the future. Particularly when the pain in the future is ambiguous and unclear and not exactly specified. Now, what is the pain in the future? It's hard to tell exactly. This is the problem. But here are the things that are unequivocal in terms of the pain of the future. Dramatically less economic growth. Dramatically less economic growth. The $1 trillion Obama stimulus, which was a lot less than the, if Biden gets his stimulus passed, we'll have $6 trillion stimulus. So Obama just did $1 billion. Remember when people were upset about 1 billion stimuluses? So the $1 trillion Obama stimulus, I think resulted in basically stagnation from most of Obama's term. And I predicted it at the time. stagnation, low economic growth, higher unemployment than necessary, lower wage growth. These are all the consequences. Lower wage growth, higher unemployment than necessary, slow economic growth, slow creation of wealth, at least wealth that everybody can feel, right? Not wealth in the stock market, which stimulus might help, again, in the short run. Ultimately, I think, the stimulus will bring about, a reckoning in the markets as well. So, stimulus is, and finally, of course, my guess is that if the $1.9 trillion Biden stimulus passes and gets enacted and gets put into law, then my guess is that stimulus will result in inflation. So I think the long-term consequences of the stimulus is stagflation, both low economic growth, stagnation, and high inflation. That's what you would expect. That's what you should expect from basically creating $6 trillion above and beyond everything the Fed has done. But this is $6 trillion of fiscal stimulus, of government distributing it. So it's not good for anybody. So the solution for the people who've really taken a hit is to reverse the policies that caused the hit. It's to solve the issue of COVID. Now, Biden does have about $400 billion to solve the issue of COVID, but at least $100 billion of it is wasted. It's to solve the issue of COVID. It's to open up the economy. It's to let people make decisions for themselves. It's to let people live. It's to let people make choices. And yes, people are still going to suffer because we got hit by a pandemic, but printing money doesn't change that fact. And indeed, as we'll see, the biggest criticism of the Biden stimulus is that it's not enough. Because it's not if you're trying to really help people in the short run or in the long run. Okay, so that's kind of the big picture on the stimulus. I want to get into a couple of things. One, I want to go over the various things in the stimulus and maybe comment on them. I want to specifically talk about the checks to individuals and give you a little bit of the left's critique of the checks to individuals and the whole approach that the left has towards these kind of things. So let's quickly do a rundown, give you a sense of how these stimulus packages work. Okay, one, right? $1,400 per person, just to check. Every person, I guess, who makes less than a certain amount. I'm sure if you make over $100,000, you're not going to get $2,000. But, every person who makes less than a certain amount of money is going to get $2,000. $400 in additional unemployment benefits and an extension of the unemployment benefits until December. Many of the unemployment benefits were going to expire in March. An extension of it all until December, and an increase above and beyond the regular unemployment benefits that people get from the states to an extra $400 over that. In many cases, unemployment benefits, or in some cases, unemployment benefits would be actually higher than what people actually were making. Let's see. Rental assistance and eviction moratorium. So $25 billion in rental assistance for low and moderate income households who have lost jobs during the pandemic. So if you lost a job, you get an additional amount of money above and beyond the unemployment insurance and above and beyond the $2,000 check that you're going to get. You're going to get some more money, right? And this is, by the way, $25 billion in addition to $25 billion that was already approved in December. So this is $50 billion to renters who are having a hard time paying rent because of all these things. $5 billion is for struggling renters to pay their utility bills. Right? And $5 billion to help states and localities assist those at risk of experiencing homelessness. So $25 billion, $25 billion, $5 billion, $5 billion. I mean, the billions are just flowing here. How about $1 billion to Yaron Brook Show? Imagine what we could do with $1 billion. We changed the world. And then, of course, the federal eviction moratorium, which Trump, the capitalist, pro-markets, your pal, Donald Trump, the great capitalist, put in place an eviction moratorium where you could not evict tenants until January. Well, Joe Biden is going to do him one socialist better than another socialist. Once every leftist has to undo the previous leftist in office. And he's extending the rent moratorium until, September 30th. So this means, right, so people with federally guaranteed mortgages, they can not pay their mortgages. This is in addition, sorry. People with federally guaranteed mortgages do not have to pay their mortgages until September 30th. And people who just can't pay their rent cannot be evicted. Why are we paying 25 billion people in rental assistance when they don't even have to pay rent to begin with because they can't be evicted if they don't pay rent? What's the downside of not paying rent? How much maintenance do you think landlords are going to do in 2021 on their buildings, given that they're getting very little rent? I know people who've told me that they're the only person in the building paying rent, that it turns out none of their neighbors are paying rent. Okay, in addition, we're going to see a 15% increase in food stamp benefits through September, right? Instead of expiring in June, they're extending it to September. $3 billion to help women, infants, and children secure food. I don't know how you secure food, but I guess they're hungry and they get food. I thought that's what the food stamps were. But to hell with it. Why not create another program? Let's call it the Food Security Program. What the hell? And then U.S. territories are going to get $1 billion in nutrition assistance. Cool. That means Puerto Rico gets some of the money. All right. So Puerto Rico gets some of the money. So, of course, I'm for it because that means, I guess less homeless people in Puerto Rico, less beggars on the street maybe. They're handing out checks. If you're needy, if there's no program for you, we're going to create a program for you. Shay asks, do men not eat? You're absolutely right. This is a sexist program, but it's really social justice because of the fact that men have exploited women for thousands of years. This is a means to balance out the equation over millennia, all these millennia of discrimination. I'm kidding, people. I know this is going to be a quote from Yaron tomorrow on somebody's Facebook page. All right, we're then going to boost the child tax credit to $3,600 for child under 6, $3,000 for 6 to 17. We're going to propose to raise the maximum earned income tax credit for a year to close to $1,500 for childless adults, increase the income limit for credit to about $21,000, and expand the range of eligible to cover older workers, blah, 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 blah. It's just, whoa. Then we're going to have subsidies for health insurance premiums, which used to be in the Affordable Care Act and were taken out. So if you have to pay more than 8.5% of your income for coverage, we're going to subsidize it on and on. He also wants Congress to provide $4 billion for mental health and substance use because, mental health problems have gone up dramatically during the COVID. And then $20 billion to meet health care needs for veterans, because we don't have a lot of money already put aside to take care of veterans. We add, what the hell, $20 billion. We're spending billions and billions, we're spending trillions of dollars. What's $20 billion among friends? Okay, restoration of emergency paid leave. The plan would reinstate the paid sick and family leave benefits that expired the end of December and extends it until September. Also tells you that they don't expect to have people vaccinated until September 30th because that's kind of the deadline that they're including on all of this. Now note that this is a way, this doesn't cost the government anything. This is a way to shift the burden to corporations, to businesses, to small businesses, large businesses, which basically means a tax increase for those businesses. They're now forced to pay sick and family leave benefits that are higher than existed before. Assistance to small businesses, $15 billion to create a new grants program for small business owners, separate from the Paycheck Protection Program, because you have already a program. You probably have 25 different programs to help small businesses. But wouldn't it be so much better and so much more stimulating if you could create an additional program and stick $15 billion in it? It also proposes making a $35 billion investment in some state, local, tribal, and nonprofit financial programs that make low-interest loans and provide venture capital to entrepreneurs. Another problem we have in this country. Absolutely. There's just not enough venture capitalists. There's just not enough people willing to invest in entrepreneurs. So we need the government now to become a venture capitalist. We need, and we know how good the government is at doing this. So we need to provide venture capital to entrepreneurs. So we need to create another $35 billion program to do that. All right. We're still like, I don't know, less than halfway through this, right? And we've already created 65 different programs. Aid to states and schools. Another $350 billion to state, local, and territorial governments to keep their frontline workers employed. Right? Because states are being so responsible to now, we want to reward them by bailing them out and helping them out, and giving them some additional money. And this is not at all to bail out irresponsible states that have been running deficits for decades and everything. $350 billion. Wow. So they're not going to force the states to use this for any particular reason. Additional assistance to the states. $350 billion is not enough, guys. Additional assistance to the states has been, they're looking to add $150 billion. No, I guess forget that. Scrap that $150 billion. Biden plan would also give $20 billion to hardest hit public transit agencies. There you go. We need buses, even though nobody's riding in the buses because, COVID and stuff. We need $20 billion to the transit agencies to help avert layoffs and cutting of routes, because we don't want to cut routes that nobody is actually using. God forbid you do that. And what will happen to the drivers and what will happen to the people employed? You have to keep them employed. So we're going to give them $20 billion to do that. And then we're going to give another $170 billion to K through 12 schools, colleges, and universities to help them reopen and operate safely and to facilitate remote learning. Most schools are already open. In many states, schools are already open. $170 billion to help schools reopen. How much of that lands up in the coffers of the teachers' unions? How much of that lands up in the coffers of the administrators? How much of that lands up just wasted and disappearing, like the $100 million that Zuckerberg once gave to the New Jersey school district as a contribution to improve education in New Jersey? And it just went like that, and it just disappeared. Now, this is on top of, by the way, just so you don't think Biden is being cheap here, this is on top of $82 billion that schools got in the December bill that the champion of capitalism, Donald Trump, signed into law, right? $82 billion. All right. Now we get to actually, maybe, in the context of what we're dealing with, maybe what government actually should spend money on. I hate to say this because some of you are going to call me a socialist, I know. All right. What is that? Well, it's vaccines and testing. Now, I'm the first one to admit, I'm the first one to argue the government shouldn't spend anything on vaccines. Let the private sector deal with it. Let insurance companies pay for your vaccines, and let Walmart and CVS and clinics and doctors and drug companies sell them to you. and by whatever mechanism they deem fit. The last thing in the world we want is government doing it, but government is doing it. So if it's doing it, let's at least get it done fast. So this is the only money I approve of in the stimulus package. And indeed, some of this money, if Trump had actually signed a bill with this money in, he was against this. He fought this tooth and nail. If the Trump administration had done some of these things, maybe we wouldn't be in this unmitigated disaster with COVID that we are in. I don't know if you know, but hospitals, when I was in Orange County, literally people were in ICUs, were in tents outside. If you weren't critical, you were being sent home, even if you were 80, in your late 80s, with COVID. You were being sent home because the hospital couldn't deal with it. Hospital couldn't deal with it. That's how swamped they were with patients, with COVID cases. This is not the flu. It is not some regular viral infection. It's a viral infection that hits old people really, really, really hard. And we could have prevented all of this. Anyway, he plans to call for $20 billion in a national vaccination program, vaccination centers around the country, mobile units in hard-to-reach areas. I don't know why only $20 billion, but that's what he's doing. I mean, it's much more important to spend $170 billion for schools, I guess. Invest $50 billion in testing. This is what Trump should have done. Should have invested in testing, providing funds to purchase rapid tests, expand lab capacity, and help schools implement regular testing to support reopening. And it would fund 100,000 public health workers, nearly tripling the community health network to do tracing. And this is what should have been done from day one. That's what the plan is going to do. Now, is any of that going to stimulate economic activity? No. Handing out checks to people, if they're worried about their job, they're likely to put it in the bank and spend it slowly. That spending will have an inflationary impact on the economy. Moderate, but it will have an inflationary impact. If they're feeling good, if the economy recovers, they'll pull that money out and they'll spend it quickly. That'll have a bigger inflationary consequence to the economy. In terms of prices, price inflation here I'm talking about. The inflation of money printing is happening in the background. Right? None of this money for schools, this is the fallacy, the Keynesian fallacy, which is it's not even MMT. I hate to say this. I know my words are going to be taken out of context. I know that. But MMT doesn't even advocate for this. Because MMT thinks that you can spend all you want as long as the spending is going to what MMT views as productive activity. That is increasing productive capacity. So that the extra dollars are actually increasing the number of goods, and therefore you don't get price inflation. Now, there are lots of problems with that. But that is much saner than this. This is old-line Keynesianism, where the problem in the economy is a lack of aggregate demand, which means people are not buying enough stuff. So you give them money to encourage them to buy stuff. And if they buy stuff, then businessmen think that this is a good sign, that this is a sign that the economy is going to do well in the future. So they start investing, they start hiring people, and that's how you get out of a recession. That is the idea of a stimulus. Again, stimulus means more consumption now. Businessmen think that this is an indication of consumption in the future. They invest and they hire people. One of the many problems with this is that the consumption now, businessmen look and say, oh, that's just the government stimulating, consumption now. It's doing nothing to produce consumption in the future, so why should I hire anybody? Why should I expand capacity? Why should I produce more when consumption in the future is still questionable? This is why the stimulus in the Great Depression didn't work. It's why stimulus packages never work. It's why the stimulus packages that Japan has tried for the last 30 years, constantly, over and over and over and over again, never work, because businessmen are not stupid. Because even Keynes recognizes that what really drives economic growth, what really drives an economy, what drives economic success, is business investment and hiring of people, entrepreneurial activity. He just wants to fool the businessman with a rush of consumption. But you can't do that. It doesn't work that way. That's another reason why, right now, all of Trump's stimulus, Trump has signed $4 trillion of stimulus into law. For those of you, again, who believe Trump is a capitalist, for those of you who believe Trump is pro-markets, for those of you who believe Trump is a conservative in any sense of the word, $4 trillion as stimulus over the last, 7, 8 months? 9 months, maybe. Trump has spent that money. Who drifted to the left exactly? That's Trump is a leftist. When it comes to economics, Trump has always been a leftist. So criticizing Trump is not a leftist strategy. That's, if you're criticizing for spending money, that's a capitalist critique of Trump. So it's stunning that $4 trillion have already been spent and the economy is not recovering. And the only time the economy recovers is when COVID cases go down and the economy opens up. That's what's needed to happen. That's the only thing that will help. That's what our politicians should be doing, moving towards freedom. Because a movement towards freedom is a movement towards economic growth, towards economic success, towards wealth creation. Stimuluses do the opposite. Whether it's a Trump stimulus, a Biden stimulus, an AOC stimulus, it doesn't matter. It's not stimulus. It's handouts, it's bureaucracy creation, it's waste, it's welfare, it's redistribution, it's central planning. It's all the things that we know are actually destructive to economic growth. Destructive to economic success. All right, a few quick reminders, and then I want to talk about these $1,400 checks and the civil war that is already starting within the Democratic Party. All right, reminders. We have 200 people watching live right now, 93 thumbs up. Come on, like the show. Like the show. If you don't like it, don't like it, of course. But I'm sure of the 200 people, over half of you like the show. So we should have well over 100 likes on the show. Please do that. Of course, don't forget to share the show. Share is how we grow the show, how we get new views. Let your friends know. Let other people know. Find ways to, and interact. It's wonderful that we have tons of comments, that we have an interactive live chat that helps with the algorithm. It helps YouTube promote the show, and it grows our audience. So this is fantastic. So thanks for doing this. And of course, please support the show, right? If you get value from what I do here, then value for value. We one of the basic premises of individualism, of freedom, of objectivism is the trader principle. If you're getting something from me, show appreciation for that. Trade back by supporting the show. You can support the show in a variety of different ways. Many of you are doing so tonight on the Super Chat. Thank you for that. We're at just under $300, which is not bad, but, $500-$600 is where we, kind of should be our plateau should be our regular kind of Super Chat income on a regular night without a match. $500-$600 should be where we'd be. So we got a little bit to go from the $300 where we are today. But thank you. I really appreciate it. I know some of you give a significant amount given how much you have, and I really appreciate that. And of course, I have a lot, about over 500, I think, monthly subscribers who contribute significant amounts of money. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Some of you do $2 a month. Some of you do $500 a month. We have at least one person who does well over $500. Well, over $500 a month. So thank you to all of you. You can become a monthly supporter by going to YaronBrookShow.com/support. You can do it on Patreon. You can do it on Subscribestar. You get a variety of different perks. For the $500 a month, you get a one-on-one with me once a month. I'm actually going to do a couple of those tomorrow. So thank you for all of you. Thank you for all of you for your generous support of the show. All right. So when Biden went to Georgia, he promised that if Georgia elected 2 Democratic senators, he would fight for $2,000 checks for individuals as part of a stimulus plan. Now, if you recall, $600 has already been approved in December. So $600 has already passed. So Biden now, in his plan, his $1.9 trillion plan, can you imagine the amount of all the goodies that people are going to get? Can you imagine, just as an aside, is it even fathomable? Is it even comprehensible? The amount of cronyism, the amount of goodies, the amount of corruption that the $4 trillion that the government has so far spent on stimulus has already created. Do you guys does anybody have really even a sense of how massive that is? I mean, think about all the PPP that Trump's entities got. Multiply that by all the congressmen and their friends and their neighbors think about now that's just one program. Think about all the programs, all the bailouts. And that's just at the federal government level. Think about the Fed and its printing of money and all of that. It's just $4 trillion. I mean, a lot of people can become rich by siphoning up just a little bit of that, a little tiny fraction of a percent of that into their own accounts. It's truly stunning when you think about the magnitude of what has already been spent, and now we want to do another $1.9 trillion. Think about how corrupt and how that institutionalizes corruption into the American system of government. One of the things that happens in reality with real people is when you're talking about massive quantities of money, it's very hard to resist. People find it very hard to resist the temptation. And again, just a sliver. I mean, just to give you a sense, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. And $1 billion is 1,000 million. It's 1 million millions. It's 4 million millions. It's handing out $1 million to 4 million people. That's $4 trillion. $1 million to 4 million people. Anyway, Biden is now living up to his promise, or so he claims. And he's living up to his promise by rounding up to 2,000, which means the checks everybody's going to get are $1,400 checks. AOC is really upset, as are many Democrats. I'm going to show you some video. I'm going to show you a video of Democrats being upset. Now, this is from David Dool, I forget his name. And this idea of he promised 2,000 and we're only getting 1,400. And as you'll see, David will say, and why only 2,000? And I will say, if 2,000 stimulates the economy, imagine how much 20,000 would stimulate the economy. Why not give every American $20,000? And if you think $20,000 stimulates the economy, why not give every American $200,000? And if that stimulates the economy, why just not make everybody a millionaire by giving everybody $2 million? I mean, whoa! We would have the best, greatest, most spectacular economy ever. It would beat the Trump economy by miles. It would make the Trump economy look like a loser economy. It's like the minimum wage. They want 15. I mean, why? Why? It doesn't increase unemployment, they tell us. So why not make the minimum wage 100? Or maybe 200 or 300 or $1,000 an hour. Why are they so cheap? Why are Democrats so cheap? Only $2,000. Thank you, K-Faxing Corp. I appreciate it. And they're not $20, $30. 2030 money. It's 2021 money. In 2030, it'll be worth a lot less. Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it. All right, so let's see what the left has to say about Biden $1,400 checks. Oh, I need to put in my headphones so I can hear what the left has to say.
Biden lays out $1.9 trillion COVID relief package with $1,400 stimulus checks.
You notice how disappointed he sounds. $1.9 trillion. Ugh. Why couldn't it be $19 trillion? $19 trillion would be really cool.
So no longer $2,000, but $1,400. But again, the argument here from the Joe Biden side of things is that, well, the 600's already passed. So 1,400 makes up the difference, makes it 2,000. Now, before I get to my thoughts on this and some of the back and forth debate, let me show you some of the pushback that Joe Biden is getting.
Somebody's asked who this is. I mean, he's the Rational National. And just to give you a sense, he has 373,000 subscribers. I have 24,000. So he's got a following. And I need help getting up to 300,000, guys. I need help in getting to be bigger than Rational National. So, right? Share. That's how you do it. All right. Here are the upset progressives.
So Cori Bush, Justice Democrat, new to Congress, tweeting out here, $1,400 does not equal $2,000.
That's right.
This was also retweeted by Jamal Bowman.
Biden's a
liar.
And
Ilhan Omar tweeting out here, not directly about what Joe Biden's saying, but clearly I think the message here is clear. $600 wasn't enough. The American people are struggling to make ends meet and need relief. We must immediately pass $2,000 survival.
I'm curious where the $2,000 come from. Who decided, in which think tank, what economic genius figured out that given the struggles of the American people right now, given the fact that, according to what they're claiming, people are starving, people are struggling, people don't have anything. How did they figure out that it's 2,000 and not 5,000 or 2 million or whatever? Where did that number come from? Interesting, huh? Central planners, they always come up with numbers. How did they figure they need 170 billion for schools? Really? I mean, did somebody really model it out? And is that a scientific central planning number, or is that just somebody pulled it out of their
survival checks? So, and one last, of course, AOC here. Jeff Stein tweeting out, AOC says Dems should pass $2,000 on top of the $600 from December rather than add the $1,400 to get $600 to 2K. $2,000 means $2,000. $2,000 does not mean $1,400.
That's right, Biden.
All right, so
stop lying.
That's the debate right now. Now, as usual, the issue here really is that Democratic leadership is erring on the side of conservative positions.
This is the problem, right? This is the progressives. The problem is that Biden is too conservative. He's just proposed $1.9 trillion, other than the Trump-Pelosi stimulus of March. This will be the second largest stimulus in American history. Double the size of the Obama stimulus in 2009. And yet, this is a conservative stimulus. Just give you a sense of kind of how this is going to play out for Biden. Biden's way too right wing because he's only willing to print $2 trillion.
Erring on the side of more corporate policy.
This is what corporations want. This is what the moneyed interests want. Biden is already sold out.
Instead of erring on the side of what is best for the people. So even if you agree with the Joe Biden argument that, well, he always meant $2,000 generally, regardless of how it got there, he meant $2,000. He didn't mean $2,000 on top of $600. Even if you think he meant that, and maybe he did, I have no reason to not believe he meant that. Why not fight for more?
Yeah, why not? Why not? I mean, at least the progressives are honest about this stuff.
Why not err on the side of the people? Why not say, hey, you know what? You're right. $2,000 really isn't enough. From their perspective, might as well add more on top of that to not just make up the difference, but give people more money than they were expecting. So there is no reason here to defend Joe Biden's position. You can say that's what he promised, that's what he's delivering. Even if you believe that, even if you think that, there is no reason to defend him here. Why not fight for more? And that's exactly what these progressive members of Congress are attempting to do here.
How much more, and by what criteria do they decide these things? It's completely arbitrary. It's completely hand-waving. And, of course, there are no consequences. And these are people who can't think. Can't think. Because there have to be consequences. Just very simple. And they could argue the consequences are worth it. Okay. But consequences.
Now, David Dayen, a reporter here, journalist that I have immense respect for, works for the American Prospect, or I should say writes for the American Prospect, tweets out here, AOC wrote the bill that substituted the $600 in the December bill with $2,000. She did not substitute it with $2,600. Sorry, it's goalpost moving. You can think this. Again, David Dayen, great reporter, a lot of respect. He's been very critical of Joe Biden and his cabinet picks. But why even bother defending Joe Biden here? What's the point? The conversation now has moved. Obviously, everyone should have known at the time that Joe Biden would not be able to pass anything because he's not president when he made that announcement of supporting the $2,000 if you got both Raphael Warnock and John Ossoffin. Everyone knew he couldn't pass that at the time. Then, if that's the case, why didn't Joe Biden say at the time, in addition to the $600, I'm going to pass $1,400?
Look, they're already quibbling and fighting over $2,000, $1,400, $2,600. I mean, can you imagine what this is going to be like over the next 4 years with the progressive left just ripping their hair out because Biden won't be as big of a socialist as they want him to be? And, you know, of course, people getting all this money, they're the ones who are going to suffer. I mean, I'm still going to have a job if we have stagflation, but will they? And at some point, the government's going to have so much inflation, so much unemployment, they won't be able to print more money. What are those people going to do then? So they're killing the lives. They're killing the future prospects of these people by making them dependent on the government instead of freeing up the economy to produce the jobs they need. Produce the jobs and create the economic activity. This is so evil. It really is. To give people the illusion, to give people the lie, the blatant, unequivocal lie, that we can just print money and give it to you. And then, why are we surprised that working class Americans are alienated? Why are we surprised that people who are poor think that they're owed? Because this is what the intellectuals are telling them. I've told you all the time, I don't even blame the looters as much as I blame this guy, Rational National. He's not rational. I don't know about national, but he's certainly not rational. Because they put these ideas into people's heads. Ooh, if we didn't have some horrible politicians, we'd be writing you all $1 million checks. If it wasn't for those greedy businessmen, you'd all have a Gucci bag. So why not steal it? These intellectuals are what are destroying this country, what are destroying this world.
He could have said that, but instead he said $2,000 checks. And to buttress that point here, Claire Sandberg tweets out, Biden is the one who moved the goalpost. In a last-ditch effort to win the Senate, he said that $2,000 checks would go out the door if Warnock and Ossoff won. Warnock posted this realistic image of a $2,000 Treasury check. Want a $2,000 check? And here's an...
They're fighting over $600. Can you imagine what's going to happen when they actually get down to budgets? When Bernie Sanders puts together, he's the head of the budget committee in the Senate. Can you imagine what happens when they start fighting about trillions of dollars?
Of a $2,000 check.
And all to buy votes, by the way. Whose idea was it, before we go on, we'll get to this in a minute, but whose idea was it to do $2,000 checks? Who threatened to veto the bill if they didn't include a $2,000 check? Who tried to buy an election with $2,000 check? Who believes that $2,000 checks were good for the American people? I hate to say it, guys. No, I don't really hate to say it because I've been telling you all the time. It was Trump. Trump was the one. I mean, nobody was talking about $2,000 checks until Trump made a big deal out of it. Trump made this an issue. This is why Biden might get the $2,000 because a bunch of Republicans are going to answer
They use this as a way to campaign. Here is a $2,000 check. Forget what people already got. Why must you use the $600 as the basis for the discussion here? That's in the past. The $600 is in the past. Now we're looking at the future. In the future should be $2,000. And again, this is the compromise. This is the bare minimum. People should be expecting $2,000 monthly retroactive to the beginning of the pandemic.
There we go. Now we've got some progressive ambition. $2,000 retroactive, 10 months, $20,000 checks they should get right now. Now $1.9 trillion. Let's multiply it by 5, 6. Let's do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, $10 trillion. Not infrastructure, even though that would be terrible too. But no, just hand people checks because that's the way you solve problems. And of course, again, think about what expectation that creates in the minds of people. Think about what this guy is teaching people about how economics work, about how government works, about what they should expect in the future, about who they deserve what from. I mean, this guy is literally destroying the lives of the people who need the $2,000 checks. But what they really need is a job. And what they're never going to have is a job because of him and his ilk. It's these progressives and their politicians and their economist friends who continuously grow the role of government, make people more and more and more dependent on government. And then what's going to happen? When the productive sector shrinks, when they can't, and the jobs disappear, which might already be happening, and people are going to demand, you think you saw riots in the summer, wait until that happens. And people now expect from the government, they expect from the wealthy, they expect, they demand, they deserve, they're entitled. And they're entitled because of intellectuals like this telling them they're entitled. And
all they're getting here is a single $2,000 check, or I should say a single $1,400 check in addition to the $600. That's all they're getting. So you're already at the compromise. Why are you compromising even further to a position of $1,400 in what I think is a clear attempt here to try and appeal more to, say, maybe Joe Manchin to support this and other Republicans and really just...
Did he just call Joe Manchin a Republican? He hasn't switched parties yet. He might, but he hasn't switched parties yet. I'm going to move this forward just a little bit. Yeah, let's move it there. He's repetitive, that's why.
Conservative policy as opposed to erring on the side of the people.
Conservatives
Last thing
versus
here,
the people.
From Common Dreams, it is far from clear how much of Biden's initial offer will become law, given that Democrats will control the Senate by the narrowest possible margin and thus be unable to afford any Democratic defections. Potentially making matters more difficult is Biden's insistence on attaining enough bipartisan support to push the proposal through the Senate with 60 votes. So again, my guess here is his political calculation is he's pushing this 1,400 as a way to try and appeal to Republicans, as opposed to saying, I promised 2,000, regardless of what was already passed, I'm going to say 2,000, I'm pushing for 2,000. Going on here, they say the New York Times reported that the top House Senate Democrats are preparing to pivot quickly to a parliamentary process known as budget reconciliation. If Biden fails to win the support of enough Republican lawmakers, only a simple majority in the Senate is needed to pass bills through the reconciliation process, which Republicans used to ram through their massive tax cuts for the rich in 2017.
Now note that Biden is counting on Republican support for this. Why? Because a number of Republicans, a significant number of Republicans, expressed significant support for $2,000 checks to individuals when Trump said that that's what he was demanding. Now, those Republicans are in a political bind. Because if they vote against the $2,000 checks, then they're going back on their word. If they vote for it, then they're just being Democrats. This is the kind of damage, I repeat myself, I know, that Donald Trump has done to the Republican Party. Basically destroyed it. And turned Republicans into supporters of the Democrats.
So, even if they don't have the 60 votes for Biden's $1.9 trillion deal here, or bill, they're going to try to use this reconciliation process to actually be able to pass anything with just a simple majority, as opposed to needing the 60 votes.
Even reconciliation, they need a 50 majority. They need all 50 Democrats to vote for it. And Manchin might not. Manchin is the Democratic senator from West Virginia, who, is much more conservative than most of these Democrats. Now let me just, I want you to hear who he thinks would vote on the Republican side for this.
Anything. So you potentially have some defections here, and people like Josh Hawley, who said he supports the $2,000, and a few others who pushed to support the $2,000 because Trump supported it. So you potentially have some defections anyways. You may not need that 60 votes if they...
So they could overcome Manchin if Josh Hawley, as you know, my favorite senator from... Josh Hawley is from Missouri, Kansas? I can't remember. But Josh Hawley might support this. Right? Shay says, Trump has been terrible, but can you really blame him for pro-spending Republicans? Bush was hardly frugal. No. My only argument is that he wasn't the savior of capitalism that people claimed he was. That's all. It's not. But he was much worse than Bush. Bush at least gave the pretense of being pro-markets. Trump never gave that pretense. Bush was at least pro-trade. Trump was not. Bush spent, but Trump spent much more. If you look at actually spending under Trump, it went up much more than under Bush. All right. Let's see. All right, we're done with the video from Rational National. And we're done with the Biden stimulus, that part of it. All right, I'm just remind you, we should be over 200 likes by now. So please like the show. Again, it really, 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 really helps with the algorithms. Please share if you like any part of the show. When the short videos come out, please share it. And please support the show, YaronBrookShow.com/support, Patreon, and Subscribe Stuff. All right, let's see what we've got. A lot of super chat questions I see, and we'll get to those. We'll get to those as we move forward here. But before that, let me just wrap this up. Look, Biden's already started with a massive stimulus bill of 1.9. He also claims, by the way, that this is step one. He plans a much, much larger plan of government spending, raising taxes in the months to come. It's going to be really important to stop this 1.9 trillion stimulus because that'll set a precedent that it's possible to stop him. One can hope that Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, helps, maybe votes against it, or at least there's some negotiation to bring the price tag down. Maybe some other Democrats who are from red states might be worried. But I have to tell you that one of the great harms that Trump has done is that he has made being physically conservative in any respect, very, very unpopular. Unpopular within the Republican Party, and therefore unpopular politically. So nobody is going to be really passionately fighting against a stimulus plan. Nobody, including the conservatives, is going to really fight against government stimulus. Biden is going to offer up a massive infrastructure budget. Well, Trump has been talking about that for 5 years. So how many Republicans are going to oppose it? And even those who oppose it, how passionate are they going to be about opposing it? So I think we're into a very, very difficult period here. In terms of government spending, I think government spending is going to go through the roof. I think the chances are that the Peter Schiff will finally be right in the sense that this might be it. This might be the big push towards inflation because government spending is already out of control, and it's going to be even more out of control with the Biden administration. And that just means stagflation through and through. And whether it happens in a year, whether it happens in 5 years, it's going to happen unless somehow Biden is reined in. The other thing that has happened, that because of Trump's behavior since the election, because Republicans lost Georgia, they can no longer oppose the Democrats. But it's worse than that. Because of what happened January 6th, because of Trump's behavior since the election, because of so many Republicans' behavior since the election, there's a good chance that Republicans don't gain seats in the midterm election as they would typically, as you would expect them to in a typical off year. Usually, in the first election after a new president comes in, the opposition party gains seats. I'm not sure they will gain any seats. They might lose seats in the 2022 election, which would then give Biden even more of a majority to screw up our economy even further. So we will be suffering for years, if not decades, from the Trump presidency. And what Biden is going to be doing to us over the next 4 years is just the beginning of that. Just the beginning of that. So we will continue to rail and rally against Joe Biden and his policies, against the policies of the Democratic Party, against massive regulations, controls, and massive government spending. And hope that somehow the Republican Party could reconstitute itself as a functioning opposition party. We will see. We will see. All right, let's see. We've got a lot of Super Chat questions. Let's go over these. The press and Democratic governors have suddenly decided that lockdowns are bad now that they've installed their Manchurian candidate in the Oval Office and no longer want crippled economy just to destroy Trump. I don't see that. I don't know why you see that. California still has lockdowns. They haven't released the lockdowns. California is obviously there's a Democratic governor in place. Ohio, which has a Republican governor, has had lockdowns throughout and continues, as far as I know, to have lockdowns. I mean, this idea that the lockdowns were meant to create a bad economy for Trump, and now that Biden is in place, the lockdowns are going to go away. I just don't think they're that calculating, that smart, that conniving, that sophisticated. I think that lockdowns will start being reduced when vaccines start being administered in mass. And I hope that happens soon, because I think that's our only chance out of this, given that both political parties have abandoned an individualist approach to COVID, which would have kept the economy open the entire time, other than people's choices to do less. But that would have been a lot different than the kind of lockdowns we've seen. But the lockdowns are a consequence of lack of leadership, consequence of lack of a plan, consequence of panicked politicians, not consequence of scheming and planning. And you can see that in California. California is still in lockdown, even though Joe Biden will become president on Wednesday. So I don't buy that. Ayn Rand Europe had errors on their page, but why was ARI's reaction to demand that they change the name of the group instead of a more benevolent approach? Does ARI have a legal right to preclude any group from using Rand's name? Again, the insider questions, just forget it. I mean, Ayn Rand Europe didn't just have errors on its page. I'll just give you one example. It had a video, and this is what really, I think, really triggered this. It had a video of Ayn Rand speaking about art, about aesthetics. And a girl, I think the girl was the woman who runs Ayn Rand Europe, finger painting, abstract splashes, non-objective art all over paper, while in the background, Ayn Rand is, talking about the meaning of art. And in some way, significant way, suggesting that these scribbles that the girl was putting on paper reflects something about Ayn Rand's view of aesthetics. That's not just an error. That is an expression of a deep lack of understanding of Ayn Rand's ideas, at least Ayn Rand's philosophy of aesthetics. Now, one of the things that you should assume when you read something like that, and I don't know where you're getting your information from, so I really don't. But maybe this is being made public without my knowledge. I don't know. But one of the things that you assume is that this is the first time, the first interaction, the only knowledge we have of somebody. Maybe other things happened. Maybe there's a broader context. Maybe we know more of the people involved. Why is the assumption, why do you read somebody's statement about this? I assume somebody made a statement about this. And just assume that everything you read is the full context, accurate description of what is actually going on in the world. Why is there zero benevolence towards the Ayn Rand Institute? And the assumption is always that we're screwing up, messing around, don't know what we're doing, authoritarians. There's no evidence of any of that. And yet that's the assumption. And then you come here and ask some questions out of the blue about all these things. If you care that much, then ask the CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute, write a letter or or try to get the full context of it. But is that appropriate? I don't know that is what we should be talking about on the Yaron Book Show. This is not an Ayn Rand Institute show. I mean, if I see real BS done in Ayn Rand's name, then I'm going to call people on it. Not me. I mean, I will call people on it. But the Ayn Rand Institute, I think, has a moral responsibility, because it is the Ayn Rand Institute, to call people on stuff like that. And maybe the people running Ayn Rand Europe exhausted the benevolence of the Ayn Rand Institute. Maybe there was already some hostility there. I don't know. Things you could consider as possible explanations for why such a dramatic act. But if you've never seen that video on art, go and watch it. That was the tipping point. There was a lot before that, but that was certainly a tipping point with regard to having Ayn Rand's name associated with something that is without any question, it's not an issue of interpretation. This is just the opposite of what Ayn Rand stood for. The opposite. In terms of art. It's complete and utter subjectivism. And if that subjectivism is an indication of your understanding of Ayn Rand's philosophy, maybe you should be studying the philosophy without promoting yourself as Ayn Rand Europe. Now, we all make mistakes. All of us make mistakes. I make mistakes. And I'm sure I misrepresent Ayn Rand sometimes. Say things that are just wrong, plain wrong. I try not to. But I don't think I've ever made a mistake that big. And that's just one of a series. Anyway. Atlas Shrugged spoilers. What is the difference between Ellis Wyatt and Hank Rearden? Why was Ellis so much quicker to join the strike? Well, how about we do this? So I'm planning to do a show on Atlas Shrugged. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to make the show basically answering your questions on Atlas Shrugged. And ideally, you would ask the questions in advance, right? Ideally, you'd ask the questions in advance. So if anybody has questions on Atlas Shrugged, particularly, and the Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead, if you have questions about the characters, the plot, the philosophical meaning of things, then please submit those questions to Yaron@yaronbookshow.com. Yaron@yaronbookshow.com. That's my email address. And I'm going to put them all together and see if I can put a show together. One show on Fountainhead, one show on Atlas Shrugged, right? So just answering those kind of questions. And if I get a bunch of questions, then I can organize it around a theme. And I've actually got a sponsor for this. So I've got a sponsor who wants me to do a show, one on Fountainhead, one on Atlas Shrugged. I'm just not sure what to focus on, and your questions would really, really help. So please submit, right? Submit those questions. And I will put those shows together. But just quickly, what the difference between Wyatt Eliot and Hank Rearden? Well, for one, we don't know much about Ellis Wyatt. We know a lot about Hank Rearden. We know his family. We know his psychology. We know what he's thinking. We're inside his head. We're experiencing what he's going through. We're living life with him. Wyatt is we know very little about him. We have some background information about him. We get a little bit of his personality from his interactions with Dagny and Rearden, but not much. So it's hard to say what the differences are based on the fact that one character we know deeply and the other character we don't. But I would argue that it looks like, from the little we know, the main difference is that Hank Rearden has he has bought into the altruistic premises in a real way that has affected him psychologically deeply. His connection to his family is the best way to see that. I don't see Ellis Wyatt having the patience that Hank Rearden has with Rearden's brother and mother. Ellis Wyatt would just dismiss them and throw them out. He might not know why he's doing it. He might not have an idea of what's going on exactly. But he wouldn't tolerate that kind of behavior as Hank does. Hank has internalized the altruistic guilt in a way that Ellis would not. And his attitude towards sex. Now, again, I don't know what Ellis's attitude towards sex is, but Hank's attitude towards sex and pleasure, in other words, his attitude towards selfishness, is what undermines him, what undercuts him. And that's the altruism. The altruism has taught him that pleasure is bad, right? Pursuing his own self-interest in some sense is bad. He still does it. Right? Now, yeah, they're both geniuses. So I think that's why Ellis is quicker, because he gets it. He's a sense of life level, at a psychological level, I think he's more of an egoist. There was a case of tenants living in someone's basement apartment who haven't paid rent in a year and legally cannot be evicted. So the homeowner hired mafia thugs to throw them out by force. Is this moral, given the injustice of legal system towards landlords? Yes, and this is the problem. That if you can't use the court system, then what are you left with? You're left with violence. When the rule of law is out, then violence is your only means. Now, I don't think this was moral, because you're going to get caught and you're going to go to jail. So you're going to lose, but there's no way out. You're screwed no matter what. If you accept the fact that they're living there and without rent, then you've lost all their money and you're losing your property and you might go bankrupt or whatever. If you hire them off you and throw them out, you'll probably go to jail. There's no win here. When the government does things like a moratorium on rent, which is one of the most outrageous things government has done ever. And again, Trump did this. Among other things. I mean, Democrats supported it completely. Then what you're doing is turning Americans against Americans. What you're doing is turning Americans to force. And it's a lose-lose proposition. It's lose-lose. There are no winners in a situation like that. Travis, thank you. Really appreciate it. Jonathan, yeah, by the way, Ocon next year. This year, not next year. This year is going to be in Austin, Texas, in late August. So it's going to be, it wasn't supposed to be in Austin this year. Last year's was canceled, the Austin conference. So this year it will actually be in Austin, Texas. So I'm excited about that. All right, let's see. So it's lose-lose. It's just a horrible situation. I'm seeing MMT used to defend the idea that the national debt isn't real and all attempts to reduce it are bad faith. Why is this wrong? Well, because that's not an argument. You haven't made any argument. The national debt, you have to pay them back. You have to pay them interest and you have to pay the principal. And theoretically, you can continuously refinance that debt. But that's only viable if interest rates stay low. What if interest rates go up? And what if interest rates are higher than the rate of growth of the economy, which is likely, particularly if we have stagflation? There's just not enough tax money. You can't continue to print money because there's inflation going on. You can't borrow money because interest rates are high and you can't afford the interest. How do you pay it back? I mean, you either have to default on the debt or hyperinflate your economy. There's no way out of it. And I did a whole show on debt, so I encourage you to go and see that. So debt is not neutral. Debt has to be paid for. Debt is money. So when you increase the debt, what you're doing is you're increasing the amount of money in the economy. And that money has to go somewhere. And right now, I think it's going into financial assets, but ultimately, it's going to have a profound, horrific impact on the real economy. It already has. Peter Schiff's contention is that the Fed can never raise interest rates because the government could never pay its debt at a higher rate. This means we cannot fight inflation. This means to be true, but I am no economist. I mean, there's a sense that's true, but remember, in 1981, the Fed did raise interest rates dramatically. Now, the debt was lower back then, but Peter is right, and this is why he's predicting hyperinflation, is right now we have so much debt that if we have inflation and the Federal Reserve increases interest rates, then because they fund the debt, this is another aspect of the irrationality and utter stupidity, if I can say so, of the people running our government. It's unbelievable. Why doesn't the government borrow debt with 30-year bonds? Then they only have to pay it back in 30 years. Instead, what the government does is it funds itself on 1-year debt that gets refinanced every year, or 5-year debts that gets refinanced every 5 years. And they have to do it every year. Now, when interest rates are going down, this is great because every time they refinance it at a lower interest rate. But what happens when interest rates start going up? Now, they have to refinance at higher and higher interest rates, and that's where Peter says they can't afford it. They have to print more and more money, which creates more and more inflation, which drives interest rates higher and higher. That's how you get into spirals of hyperinflation. And there's no easy way out of it other than either defaulting on the debt or raising interest rates, short-term interest rates, so high as to convince markets that long-term rates should be low, and government shifting to refinancing using long-term rates, which is what happened in 1982. And the U.S. economy spiraled into a very, very deep recession when that happened. It was very, very unpleasant. Luckily, Reagan was president, and taxes were cut, and deregulation was happening, and the U.S. economy recovered very quickly out of that recession. But Paul Volcker crushed inflation by raising interest rates super high. The more debt there is, the more difficult it is for that to do, for the government to do that. So Schiff is right in that sense. Are Americans still more selfish than Europeans? Are Asians more selfish than Americans? Or are Americans the only semi-selfish culture on the planet? No, I mean, I think everybody is semi-selfish. I certainly think Europeans are. Semi-selfish in a sense that they don't know how to take care of themselves. But in some vague sense, they know they need to and want to take care of themselves. And they make the error or the evasion of, instead of investing in productive work, wanting those long vacations. But they want the long vacations not because they can then sacrifice to their fellow man, but so that they can do nothing, which is pseudo-selfish. It's self-destructive, but it's not altruistic. Mother Teresa was not selfish, defined in any semblance of a way. By no standard is Mother Teresa selfish. So everybody's kind of semi in that sense, that they are pursuing what they feel is good for them instead of what they think. They don't use their minds. In terms of which are the more focused on self-improvement, if you will. Well, I think right now the Asians are probably more focused on that than Americans, who are just focused on indulgence, primarily in self, but not really on self-improvement and progress. So Asians and Americans, I think, are more so than Europeans. But again, what does semi-selfish mean? What does selfish mean in that sense? Given that none of them are really pursuing it in a rational way, in a consistent way. I think Steven Pinker is a small minority. Most progressive intellectuals are scheming nihilists at heart. Yeah, I mean, I think Steven Pinker is in the minority, but Steven Pinker is not a progressive. I mean, again, stop thinking in dualities. The world is not made up of this or that, zeros and ones. That's not the world. There are progressives. There are Democrats. there are liberals, there are more classical liberals, and they're all different. They're all generally on the left, but they all occupy a different space in the left. And to equate AOC with Steven Pinker, or to equate Steven Pinker with, the guy who was advocating for, anti-racism, the anti-racism ideology, is a massive injustice, and is immoral. Yet both are on the left, but one's on the far left and one's on the center left, and not in the same category. This is why left and right are so horrible categories. Because Steven Pinker has more in common with me, in my view, than he has with the far left. And yet, you label him with the far left. And yes, there are very few people, left or right, as identified today, who have a lot in common with me. Steven Pinker is one of the few. I think Steven Pinker would be horrified to believe that he has a lot in common with me. I'll give him that. But he has more in common with me, I think, than the progressive left, far left. So, you guys have got to become better thinkers. If you're listening to the show, one of my purposes is, I know a lot of you already agree with me, a lot of you are already good thinkers and so on, but I'm hoping that one of the impacts I have on people is to get you to be a little bit more subtle in your thinking, a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more observant, a little bit more reality-oriented, a little bit more connected to reality. Yeah, Steven Pinker's IQ theories are nuts, but, he's one of the good guys. That doesn't mean everything he says is right. A lot of his stuff is wrong, but he's one of the good guys. And he's certainly not at the level of some of these crazy leftists. You can't have these just two buckets, Democrats, Republicans. If you did, where would you put me? Not in either one of those. And what you should be focused on is on truth, is on what do people stand for, and what is the correspondence of their ideas with reality. And what are the things that are bad, in what way are they bad, and how bad are they? I understand why anti-Semitism took off in Europe, but why did it take off in America? Do you think the alt-right is a bigger force in America than in Europe due to the First Amendment protection? No, I don't think it's due to the First Amendment. I think it's right now. I don't know that it's bigger. To some extent, Poland is very, very heavily influenced by the alt-right. The alt-right is big in Eastern Europe. It's hard for me to measure the impact of alt-right in Europe versus America. But it's big in America. It's big in America not because of the First Amendment protection. It's big in America because of the level of frustration people have. It's big in America because of our educational system, because our intellectuals teach everybody collectivism, because collectivism is the dominant idea in the world in which we live. It's because of that collectivism. And then because of the alienation, because of the frustration of so many people with the left and with the right and with what they stand for today and with the dead end that the world seems to be. And of course it's, I know you guys are going to freak out, but it's partially Trump. Part of Trump's campaign wasn't specifically anti-Semitic, but it was aligned with anti-Semitism. Because Trump's campaign in 2015 and 16 was, the world sucks, but it's not your fault, it's the fault of the other. Well, in Trump's world, the other is primarily Mexicans and Chinese. But this way of thinking of the world sucks and it's not your fault, it's the fault of the other, is how anti-Semitism is always presented. It's what Europeans are being drenched with. Yeah, things are bad after World War I. Things are awful. But it's not Germans' fault. It's Jews that have done this to you. Americans, you've lost your jobs. You know, there's a lot of crime. Things are bad in this country. But it's not your fault. It's those nasty Mexicans and Chinese people that are doing it to you. And it's that mentality that Trump brought into the Republican Party and brought to the masses that contributed to the growth in anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism has always been there, just like racism has always been there. It's grown because people are frustrated and looking for somebody to blame. It's why conspiracy theories grow, because people are frustrated and they're looking for ways to explain the world. Somebody says, I thought Israel loved Trump. I didn't say Trump was anti-Semitic. I said Trump created the mindset that makes anti-Semitism, within which anti-Semitism thrives, blaming the other. Well, the other has always been the Jew. And look, it was the guy who killed those people in the Pittsburgh synagogue, killed Jews, the anti-Semite who did that, was inspired by Trump's anti-immigration rhetoric. That's not the same with the guy who killed those people in a Walmart. That's not science fiction, that's reality. So anti-Semitism grows when people are frustrated, when people are looking for simple, straightforward explanations for the fact that their lives are not going well, that things are bad, that things are rotten. Right? And they need somebody to blame for that. And a mentality that says that I need somebody to blame for my rotten life, particularly when the intellectuals are telling him and the politicians are telling him it's not his fault. There's no personal responsibility. Looks for the other to blame, and the Jews are always a convenient other to blame. Will Texas and Florida become, somebody says they're not seeing anti-Semitism. You should see what happens when I do shows on the alt-right, or if I do tweets on the alt-right, or if I say something here. Not now, because people have calmed, because they've left. But in the good old days when the alt-right was all over my chat, and the amount of anti-Semitic stuff that came out on my chat towards me. But it's too bad I didn't take screenshots of the tweets I got when I did a show on the alt-right in 2016. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, it could have been just one person. It could have been not, but hundreds of these tweets. All right. Will Texas and Florida become the next New York and California if trends continue? It seems like all major cities are leftist except Dallas and Houston. Why is that? I think Dallas is on the left. I think Dallas, the mayor is a Democrat. I think that's right. You'll have to check. Well, I mean, there's a number of things. Republicans have lost the cities primarily because the cities, cities occupied by minorities, and minorities vote Democratic. And then what the other thing has happened is the Republicans have lost the suburbs. The suburbs are typically educated, and there's a massive education gap between Democrats and Republicans. It's just a fact. Democrats are much more highly educated than Republicans. Now, we're not just talking about PhDs, because PhDs destroy the mind, so you'd expect them to be leftist. But we're talking about, I'm kidding, but you're talking about, only a little bit kidding, depending on what you got your PhD in. But I'm talking about the fact that people are more educated, people who tend to be more into science, people who tend to have bachelor's degrees in engineering tend to be Democrats, not Republicans. And what happens is Republicans have lost the suburbs. And I think there are two reasons for that. One is religion, and not everyday religion, but the passionate religionists and the anti-evolution rhetoric. And second, Trump. Republicans, particularly in the Trump era, but it started under Bush, have become the uneducated political party. The political party of without any intellectual, it's become anti-intellectual. Suddenly, in the Trump era, the Republican Party has become anti-intellectual. And I think as a consequence, the more educated people, but I include here people in the sciences and engineering and so on, not just in the humanities, are voting against Republicans. That never used to be the case. By the way, rich people as well. I mean, the richest counties in the country have gone Democratic. Partially because of cronyism, but to a large extent because of a deep dislike of Republicans and a sense of guilt that's been inculcated in them that they express when they vote Democratic. It appeases their guilt. All right, let's see. Most people just think in short term, free is too good to not accept. Yeah, that's the problem. Short term thinking is not thinking. Please talk about Rand's first success, night of January the 16th. Do you like it as a play? Was Bjorn Faulkner like Trump? He was based on the Mogul Ivor. Yeah, today is January the 16th, so I guess it's a good day to talk about the play. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's quite late. But yeah, I do like the play. I think it's very well done. I think it's dramatic. I think it's exciting. I think the gimmick of having the trial and the audience vote is brilliant, and I think is partially responsible for the play's success. I've seen it in two languages where I didn't understand a word. I've seen it in English, of course, but then I saw it in Guatemala in Spanish with no translation, and I saw it in Ukraine in Ukrainian with no translation. Both were staged in those countries when I was there by complete accident, or to some extent by accident. Ukraine, I kind of knew it was going to be there. I don't think Bjorn Faulkner is like Trump. He is far more he's far more romantic, far more of a Errol Flynn type character, of a swashbuckling, exciting type of person. He is, and Ayn Rand seemed to have liked this idea of people who flaunt convention and who are at the edge in terms of their morality and in terms of the legality of what they do, but are bigger than life. I think what she liked is bigger than life, but not bigger in life as complete pragmatists, but bigger in life as loving life and embracing life and enjoying life, and I think that's what Bjorn Faulkner is. And I no Ayn Rand heroes like Trump. Really, none of them. So yes, I very much enjoy January 16th. Very much, if there's a performance anywhere near you, definitely go and see it. It's definitely worth going to see. All right. The ominous parallels are playing out. We could see inflation into 2020s, the same as inflation in Germany in the 1920s, cumulative with massive economic collapse, followed by strongman authoritarian takeover. Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it this show for a long time, that both the dim hypothesis and the ominous parallels, which don't contradict each other, they actually reinforce one another, are both playing out before our eyes, actually faster and sooner than I would have expected. What is the difference between the stimulus money and PPP money? Is there a better standard than chanting, "I'm against the programs" as objectivist absolution? Both are wrong. Both are redistribution of wealth. Both are attempts to help people. Both are damaging to the economy long term. Both are destructive. It's not like I support the PPP. The PPP is targeted at businesses. The stimulus money includes PPP. The December stimulus included PPP. The April stimulus included PPP. So I'm not sure what you're comparing and why I don't get the point unless you're trying to say, but ARI took PPP money. But we explain why we took PPP money while condemning the program and while saying that it is a bad program. It's a program that redistributes wealth and destroys future economic growth. Now, PPP is a little better because it's targeted. It's targeted at the businesses that were hit by COVID. It wasn't well done because it didn't, for example, require you to show that you were hit by COVID. It wasn't well done because it applied to, any business could apply to it. But if you're going to provide help, then provide help to people who lost their jobs because of COVID and businesses that had to shut down because of COVID. And that's it. But all these other programs that constitute $6 trillion of stimulus are just handing goodies out to people irrationally. Yeah, the dim hypothesis I mentioned earlier and ominous parallels are both brilliant books by Leonard Peikoff. Highly, highly recommended. Okay, does the federal government get a lot of infrastructure spending passed? It has, on an annual basis, there's a lot of infrastructure spending that gets spent already. It seems like that's one area both sides love to agree on, but I never hear much about grand bipartisan infrastructure bills. No, the Biden stimulus package was positioned as an infrastructure bill. It was supposed to be shovel-ready projects, but it turned into be a big boondoggle. And Republicans have always been skeptical of big infrastructure projects spending at the federal level because they tend to be wasteful and corrupt and bad. But Trump talked about this for 4 years, but never actually proposed one. He kept saying, I'm going to propose a big multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure program, and never did it. But infrastructure is the same. I mean, government shouldn't be building infrastructure. Federal government shouldn't be building infrastructure. State governments are much better positioned to do it if it's going to be by government. Federal government should stay out of it. But it's a thing that people talk as if is bipartisan. But you're right, it never actually gets passed. It never actually gets passed in a bipartisan way. And we'll see if Biden can get Republicans to vote for an infrastructure bill he proposes. Can writing congressmen affect policy? Are there any objectivist websites that helps facilitate writing letters succinctly? I recently sent a letter generated by a COVID testing company to free up regulations. I think writing letters to congressmen does affect policy because congressmen get voted in by relatively few people, so they care about marginal voters and voters that are engaged and involved. And if they have a feeling that you represent more people that think like you or that you would lobby around the ideas, you're active around these ideas, then it means even more. So absolutely letters do help affect policy at the margins. They're not going to turn a socialist into capitalist or the other, it might turn them the other way around. That's happened. But I've never seen a socialist become a capitalist, but I've seen capitalists become socialists. So it's definitely worth doing. I don't know. There used to be an objectivist thing, but I don't know of any objectivist program that teaches people to write letters to the editor and helps them do it. But that's a great program to have and to do, because I do think letters to congressmen actually do make a difference, particularly on specific projects, specific issues. What are your thoughts on passive investing strategies and ETFs? Could they present a systematic risk to the market by blindly following the market or indices without looking at fundamentals of stocks? No, because somebody is looking at fundamentals. You looking at fundamentals is not going to make any difference. So I'm a big fan of passive investing and ETFs for people who are not professionals. Let the professionals figure out what the fundamental value of a stock is. Let the professionals figure out if a stock is really overvalued or undervalued or accurate. Let the professionals do the work. And you're riding on their coattails in a sense of you're just investing for the long run passively because you don't know anything. You're ignorant. And, professionals love to trade against ignorance. So when you're ignorant and you think you know something, professionals love to take advantage of you. It's a rational taking advantage of you. They know something, you don't. They know what they're doing, you don't. It's investing is a profession. You wouldn't start doing brain surgery just because, as an amateur. But so many people think that investing is just something they can do without any effort. It's the myth of investment is gambling, or investment is just paper shuffling, or investment is easy. Oh, believe me, to beat a passive strategy requires a vast expertise that 99.9% of the people just don't have. That's why you should hire a professional or be a passive investor. Just like you hire a surgeon. You don't treat yourself. Months ago, you told us of an Ayn Rand quote you liked that mentioned money. Do you remember what it is? I know I'm being vague, but I don't even remember you praised the imagery. I don't. Sorry. I don't remember, and it's getting a little late, so maybe my mind's getting foggy, but I don't remember what I was talking about. Once the government makes it illegal to work, do they have a responsibility to pay those people's bills? What does it even mean? The government has a responsibility. The government is nobody. How are they going to pay those people's bills? With whose money? If nobody's working, who do they tax to pay the bills? There is no... The idea that the government has a responsibility to take money from Y and give it to Z. No, the only responsibility of government is to protect your rights, to get out of the way. Not to redistribute it differently now because they violated your rights. No, get out of the way. If they've done something wrong, the solution to them having done something wrong is to do it right. Which means get out of the way. On Lex Friedman number 149, Lex is talking with a philosopher whose favorite philosopher is Kant. And I was really hoping Rand would be brought up. And at 20:02, Lex mentions her. So there's one small win. Yeah, I think Lex is a win. The fact that he's interested in Rand is a win. He keeps bringing her up. He has people on who talk about her. And that will expose new people to her ideas and will increase, the exposure and the probability that people will read her and therefore be influenced by her. Did Ronald Reagan turn the country against antitrust? Some extent, not really, not completely. But what Ronald Reagan did is basically his Justice Department, his regulatory agencies basically didn't pay too much attention to antitrust and started a period in which antitrust prosecutions declined significantly. But I don't think the country was against it, although he generally changed the mood of the country to be more pro-business, pro-markets. And in that sense, the mood of the country became less favorable towards antitrust. Here is $10 for you, Yaron. Maybe in 5 years, this is what the loaf of bread will cost with all of this government spending. I don't buy loaves of bread. I'm off bread. Haven't bought a loaf of bread in well over a decade, maybe 2 decades. What are viable objectivist interpretations of Adolf Huxley's Brave New World? Is it realistic that non-initiation of force could lead to such a dystopia? No, it's not. So non-initiation of force does not lead to dystopia. It leads to a good life. It leads to amazing things. There's no dystopian outcome from non-initiation of force. And it's been too long since I read Brave New World for me to do a review of it. Naveen says, I think the character the most like Trump in Atlas is Cuffy Meggs. Yes, the brute, the materialists, the anti-intellectual. That's Rand's villain. That's who Trump, I think, is closest to. Can you expand on your view that Americans and Europeans use alcohol as a substitute for real enjoyment? Yeah, I mean, I think Americans in particular, but Europeans as well, are repressed. They repress their emotions, particularly men. They repress their emotions. They're afraid to feel. They're conflicted about feeling. They've been taught to repress their emotions. They've been taught that their emotions will be in conflict with their reason. And so they're very repressed. And they find it difficult to enjoy themselves. They find it difficult to experience pleasure because they've been taught that, just like Reardon. Reardon's a great example of this, right? Because they've been taught that pleasure is evil. Pleasure is a sign of selfishness. Pleasure is no good. So what they do is they experience illicit pleasure, and then they condemn themselves for it, which is exactly what, in a sense, Reardon does. He has sex with his wife and he hates it. He has sex with Dagny. He loves it, but he hates himself for doing it. And it's illicit because it's an affair. So, I think that that Christianity in particular has repressed people to the point where they don't really live their emotions. They don't fully embrace them. They don't fully integrate with them. They don't fully experience them. And as a consequence, they're repressed. And what happens when they have alcohol is that the alcohol reduces those inhibitions. It takes away that repression. And it manifests at them, I think, thinking that they need the alcohol in order to feel that pleasure, that sense of wholeness, that sense of it's okay to feel. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to enjoy yourself. They need the alcohol for that. Because their philosophy, the way they've been brought up, the messages they get from the culture are that pleasure, enjoyment should be repressed. And that's natural, and that's masculine, by the way, to repress. And so they need alcohol in order to feel. Right. All right. Where are we? I think we're done. All right. Thanks, everybody. Oh, one last one. What happens to states like Wyoming, Montana, Texas, West Virginia, and other natural energy producing states under Biden? How do you propel small towns? I mean, I don't think Biden's going to destroy energy. He can't afford to. I think he'll increase regulations on it, just like Obama did. I think it'll become more costly and more difficult, but I don't think it's going to go to zero. I don't think it's going to, completely collapse. I think it's going to be a cost. Now, West Virginia is dying anyway because coal is dying anyway because natural gas is so much cheaper than coal. But Texas is going to do okay. Montana, Wyoming are going to do okay. Biden is not going to completely destroy energy. He's going to make it more expensive. No question about that. But life will not end under Biden. The world is not going to go to complete hell under Democrats. That's just not how the world works. Bad things will get done. Bad things got done under Trump. We survived, and we will survive this too. All right, everybody. I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your weekend. Talk to you sometime tomorrow. I'm not sure exactly what time, but I'll post it in the morning.